Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to unpack a 700-year story of how one faith literally split in two. And this isn't just about religion. It's a story of politics, of power, and a deep philosophical struggle over the very nature of God that created the divide between the Catholic and Orthodox churches that we still see today.
So let's start with this quote from an 8th century theologian named John of Damascus. He's talking about religious images, icons, and it kind of hints at a core question that would tear an empire apart. How do you even represent the divine here on earth? That single question, that's the thread that's going to run through our entire story.
Now, the final break didn't happen until 1054, but the cracks had been forming for 700 years. So here's how we're going to trace that story. We'll look at the political landscape, tackle an impossible theological question, see the messy councils that tried to solve it, then a literal war over art, and finally, the Great Schism itself.
Okay, so before any of the theological arguments even got started, the church was already split, not by faith, but by politics. It was basically living in two completely different worlds, and that simple fact set the stage for everything that was about to follow.
So here's the bottom line. In the West, after Rome fell, there was a huge power vacuum, and the Pope kind of had to step up and become a political player. But in the East, the Byzantine Empire was still going strong, and the emperor was the one in charge. He often used the church as a tool of the state, which meant huge theological debates could be decided by imperial decree. You see the problem? It was mixing faith and politics in a way that just wasn't happening in the West.
All right, so you've got this political stage set. Now let's throw in a theological problem that would fuel centuries of debate. It was a question so difficult, it seemed to completely defy logic.
I mean, really think about that for a second. This was the fundamental puzzle everyone was trying to solve about Jesus Christ. If God is defined by everything humanity is not, infinite, eternal, perfect, how could he also be fully and completely human at the very same time?
And this is maybe the best analogy I've ever heard. It's like trying to make hot ice cream. Theologians had defined God and humanity as such polar opposites that the incarnation, God becoming man, seemed like a total logical contradiction. How do you solve hot ice cream?
So basically, you had two major schools of thought pop up, and each one tried to solve the problem by leaning into one side of the equation. The Alexandrians, they prioritized Christ's divinity. They said, look, he has to be a clear window to God. But the Antiochians, they prioritized his humanity, arguing that to save us, he had to be one of us.
So what happens when you have a political emperor who can just call a meeting to settle a seemingly impossible theological question? Well, you get a series of dramatic, often violent church councils that ended up dividing the church way more than uniting it.
Now, this first big fight sounds like it's about Mary, but it was really a proxy war over the nature of Jesus. Nestorius, he came from that Antiochian school that emphasized humanity. But his opponents in Alexandria were terrified that his approach was basically splitting Jesus into two separate people, a human guy and a divine being sharing a body. And this term, Theotokos, it became a litmus test. If you could call Mary the God-bearer, it meant you believed that the baby in her arms was truly God incarnate, a single, unified person. So it was way less about honoring Mary and all about safeguarding the unity of Christ.
The Council of Ephesus was just one of several attempts to nail all this down. But as you can see from this timeline, every time the church tried to draw a line in the sand to create unity, it often just ended up creating brand new fractures.
And believe me, things did not calm down after Ephesus. A few years later, a monk named Eutyches went to the complete opposite extreme, claiming Christ's divinity basically swallowed up his humanity. This led to a council in 449 that was so violent and corrupt that Pope Leo later nicknamed it the Robber Synod. I mean, the Patriarch of Constantinople was beaten so badly, he died a few days later. It was brutal.
So, to clean up this absolute mess, a new council was called a Chalcedon. And its definition is, honestly, a masterpiece of careful language. It doesn't try to explain the hot ice cream mystery. Instead, it just sets up boundaries. It says Christ's two natures are united without being confused, and they're distinct without being separated, and they're joined together in one single person, or what they called a hypostasis.
But, and this is a huge but, not everyone accepted Chalcedon's elegant solution. The result was the first permanent splits in the church. The Nestorians broke away. And many in Egypt, Syria, and Armenia rejected the two natures language, forming what became the Coptic, Syrian, and Armenian churches that are still around today.
Okay, let's fast forward 300 years. The same fundamental debate about Christ's nature flares up all over again. But this time, it wasn't fought with theological terms, but with art in a bitter and really destructive controversy over religious icons.
So you had two sides, the iconoclasts, or image breakers, and the iconodules, or image venerators. But listen, this wasn't just about art. The iconodules argued that if you say you can't depict Jesus, you're basically denying that God truly became visible and human. It was the same hot ice cream debate all over again, just fought with paint and wood instead of philosophy. A council in 787 finally settled the debate by making this really crucial distinction. It said that latria, which is true worship, is for God and God alone. But icons can receive dulia, a kind of veneration or deep reverence, because they're like windows that point to God. They're not objects of worship themselves.
So, all of these theological arguments, these political rivalries, these cultural differences, they had been simmering for centuries, and by the 11th century, the whole thing finally boiled over, leading to the definitive break between East and West.
By the 1050s, the list of grievances was just long. A huge theological one was the Filioque Clause. The West had added the words "and the Son" to the creed. To the East, this was an unauthorized, unilateral change to the very definition of God. And you combine that with practical issues like priestly marriage and the ultimate flashpoint, the Pope's authority, and tensions were at a breaking point.
The moment it all snapped was in 1054. The Pope's representative, a cardinal named Humbert, who, by the way, knew no Greek and had zero patience for Eastern customs, marches into the great Hagia Sophia Cathedral in Constantinople, right in the middle of a service.
And he slaps a decree of excommunication against the Patriarch Michael Cerularius right on the high altar. Well, the Patriarch immediately responded by excommunicating the cardinal, and just like that, the schism, which had been developing for 7 centuries, was official, mutual, and complete.
What had once been one church, at least in theory, was now irrevocably 2 distinct bodies of faith: the Roman Catholic Church, centered in Rome, and the Eastern Orthodox Church, centered in Constantinople.
And this long, complicated history of division leaves us with a final, really provocative thought. After nearly 1,000 years of separate development, different theologies, different practices, different cultures, what would unity for these 2 great traditions of Christianity even look like today? Is it even possible?